Nobody cares what your opener is if it doesn't lead to you actually having a winning third attempt and a winning total. One of the biggest mistakes that I often see in competition is simply opening too heavy. And while we often talk about this a lot in powerlifting, it's really important to understand the context of why opening too heavy is holding you back. Now, typically, people are going to open very heavy because of probably two reasons. One, they feel that there's some kind of expectation that they have to open at a certain level because that is what is expected of them, and that if they open light, then they're going to be looked down on. And then number two, they're opening heavy because they don't actually have a tremendous amount of confidence in being able to take a jump to their third attempt. The first part is really difficult to overcome. That's a confidence thing that will come with experience when you start to understand that nobody cares what your openers are. Nobody's really going to give a crap. And if anything, it's going to give you a competitive edge, because if you open really conservatively and then people underestimate what you're able to do, once you take good, strong jumps going to your second and third attempts, you're probably going to start to put a lot of pressure on people because they're going to see that you actually have way more in the tank than they initially thought. They're going to have to start second guessing their own attempts in order to have a competitive advantage over you in the actual competition. And the second part, where we simply don't have the confidence to be able to take a big jump to the third, but that's normally indicative of a training peak where attempt selection has been made, but it hasn't been derived from realistic evidence driven from training, i.e., we guess that this is where a lift might be based on logical training progressions, as in we think that just because something has happened a lot in the past, it's going to continue to happen in the future, but it's simply not true. When it comes to actually putting together a great performance, and especially a great third attempt on the day, and putting together a good total, we need to look at what is the most realistic effort based on what has been happening in training. What is the most realistic effort based on what we are seeing on the day in terms of how much fatigue are we taking into each third attempt, how fatiguing was a previous effort, how much of that is going to then affect what we can do in the following effort, i.e. will a heavy squat take away a lot of effort from a heavy third deadlift? Probably. Does somebody's squat really affect their bench? For some people it does, and these are all factors that we actually need to account for when we're looking at putting together a good training plan. And then finally, beyond that, most people just tend to think that we can pull numbers out of thin air when it comes to tapering, and that's simply not true. So when we're actually looking at third attempts, what we should be looking at is, how do I save effort and come into my third attempt as fresh as humanly possible? Because your third attempt should be a realistic extension of your second attempt. And your second attempt is the most important attempt of the day. That's the one where you should be reasonably stimulating, reasonably challenging, but not so challenging that you essentially cash in all your chips on that. So our opener is irrelevant at that point. What we want to be able to do is open, get the total done so that you're not going to bomb out of your meat, take a big jump to your second, which should be something that you can hit with confidence based on what you've been able to do in training. And then your third will likely be a chip, which should also be derived from training. Now, it's important that when we take big jumps, we've been doing big jumps in training. If you only take small jumps in training, now is not the time to take big jumps. But it's also really important to question why you haven't been taking bigger jumps in training, and the effect that that's going to have on you both on the day and sort of long term throughout your training peak. Because quite simply, with smaller jumps, you're going to be shifting more kilos, you're going to be more exhausted, and you're going to be pulling down the ability for you to put together a meaningful top effort. So if you want to start putting together better performances on the day, it's really crucial that you start to build the confidence to take bigger jumps both in training and in competition. You trust that you know what you're doing, and that you shift as few kilos as possible on your route to actually getting to your third attempt, so that when you come into that, you're fresh which means you're going to be as fresh as possible coming into the final event of the day, the deadlift, which is where you're going to have the ability to make up the most kilos typically. So just some ideas there on some mistakes that I often see in powerlifting, some ways that you can adjust that for better results.